This is Melanie from Howzit, and today we're sitting with Simeon. Welcome, Simeon, to our latest podcast. It's great to have you on our show.
Great to be here.
Fantastic. So we've got you on regularly, but today we're going to look at a very interesting topic around the importance of considering skills and passion and impact into your career planning. So before we start with that, I just want to give the people some introduction around who you are. You're a professional career coach, and you focus on helping senior leaders and executives excel in their work and achieve career goals that they're passionate about. I know that you've helped many South Africans as well, and other immigrants wanting to come into Canada as well as America. In addition to the work that you've done with corporate clients, you've also partnered with career development companies, coaching clients who terminated, or in other words in Canada called in transition, as well as I've mentioned, new immigrants into Canada. A lot of Simeon's work has revolved around resume and LinkedIn strategies and how to help clients develop a clear personal value proposition to potential employers. And Simeon's philosophy, you can tell us around that, is not just a part of bullet points, but really to tell a success story. That's what you're really good at, is to highlight that. So, but today we're going to take a little bit of a step back, and we're going to take it away from resume writing, and we're going to go into discussion with Simeon around what people need to reflect on and prepare themselves as they enter or re-enter the job market, to navigate through the careers, no matter what life stage you're in, whether you are planning to immigrate into Canada or America, or you just, as we said, you kind of looking at re-entering the job market or changing that, and what you need to really do to truly be prepared to find the right job. Okay, so you, aside from focusing on the resumes and the professional documents, how else do you take your clients through and prepare them to be ready for the workforce? Maybe give us that intro, Simeon.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Melanie. One of the things that a lot of my clients often say to me, whether they're immigration folks that are coming to Canada or whether they're Canadian, is they come and say, well, you know what, actually what I need for my next role or career is a piece of paper called a resume, and can you help me with putting that together and maybe editing the words a little bit and wordsmithing it and making it a little bit more attractive. And in fact, a lot of clients even focus on formatting, right? They really want it to look pretty and all of that. But what I tend to do is I take a step back from that, and I ask my clients three key questions, and those questions, I believe, are really what drive a good resume. Okay, it's not going to be the language or even what you put in there from a content perspective yet, but the first question I ask them is, what skills do you bring to the table? So a point to think about is, when you go to an employer or potential employer, what value proposition do you have? What value are you going to add to their organization such that they would want to hire you on versus a competitor? The second question I ask them is, what is your passion in your life? And that might seem like a really strange question because it's a professional environment. So what has passion got to do with it? Well, passion is actually the thing that drives us to anything that we're not passionate about. We're going to dread waking up in the morning and trying to do that job. But if we love what we do, then we'll tend to do it better and we'll do more of it. And you want to have a career that actually is driven by passion, not just about skills. So what do you love doing is the second question that I ask clients with. And the third one, which is equally important, is what impact are all these things going to have on society and your business and all that. So, you may have really good skills, you may have a lot of passion, but at the end of the day, if it really has very little impact, is that something you really want to invest time in? So, before we get into writing a resume, we talk about these three things. And what that tends to do is to make my clients more reflective and thinking about what they've done in the past and what they've been good at. And I often sort of talk about storylining your value proposition. So, people are drawn to stories, right? That's how we remember concepts and things about people. And if you can tell a story with your resume about the past, present, and future, keeping in mind the skills, keeping in mind about what drives you as a passion and what impact you want to have, then obviously when you write it out on a piece of paper, it'll be that much easier to write and it'll be a lot more sincere. So that's what I mean, those three questions.
Absolutely. So does this change around the advice that you've given around those three things? Does it change in the current time, in the COVID time? Are there some realistic advice that you can give around should this change, or how does this look like?
I think the biggest challenge that the biggest thing that COVID I've seen has done to the job market, is that it's actually leveled the playing field. With skills that you brought into the workforce before, if you walked into the office, before COVID, you would have a certain a toolkit of things that you could do, maybe programming or accounting or um, but what COVID has done, it's really caused a lot of companies to shave off all the things that are not really important because they have to stay afloat. So I see this very
Yeah.
often where people think, well, I was indispensable before. I thought that was the case. So, why have I been laid off, or why is it that I can't find a job that I really love to do? In light of COVID, these three questions have to still be asked, but just a lot quicker. And you really
Yeah.
have to be very articulate about, what skills am I really good at? Okay, so I bring into this environment of COVID a set of skills, let's say 4 or 5 things that I'm really good at. Okay. And then you think about, okay, what am I passionate about? Well, I love all 5 of them, right? But then the question is really important in COVID coming out of it is, what impact does it have? Because if what you're saying is that the employers are kind of laying you off, they're basically saying that your skills have really not added any value to their company. So as you think about COVID, it's very, very extremely important to think about the impact question when you come out of COVID and you're looking for that next role. And I understand a lot of people who I work with are just looking for that next opportunity because they need to put food on the table. So they don't have time for this kind of reflection, etc. But I think these questions still need to be asked. At the end of the day, it's an investment. COVID will pass, and we don't know what it's going to look like after. But the job market has to go on, and so the way that you remain competitive now is not just what you've brought in from skills, but what impact do you need to have. So very valuable still, but just has to be accelerated. And whereas before it would have taken maybe 4 to 6 weeks with a client to kind of go from start to end, now it's between 2 to 3 weeks. You got to get that running,
Yeah.
reflect, and kind of get that resume out there that's really reflective of your understanding of what impact means in this new economy.
Absolutely. It's changed. The principles are the same, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it might have just that you just need to hone in on those skills to really get yourself marketable. It doesn't change in the fact that people are saying it's great advice. You've mentioned some of it, but they just need a job right now and it's urgent.
Mm-hmm.
How do you counsel them? Do you counsel them differently? You've mentioned that maybe not specifically as different, but
Yeah. Well, if it's an urgent kind of thing, and I mean, a job is always urgent, right? And you don't go to a career coach kind of thinking, well, I'm going to think about a year from now what happens. And often clients kind of approach me urgently because they realize all of a sudden that the coaching would be helpful. Um, if you just need a job, then realistically speaking, you don't have time. You don't have the luxury of kind of, working through all the details of your resume. And so what I do is I spend a lot of time in that case, just making sure that there's consistency across the board, and that's more than just editing. Again, sitting down with people and saying, can you walk me through your very first job? And what exactly was it that you did? So for throwing out all the bullet points is think about what you did, but I still try to focus on what skills did that develop in that role, in that project. What did you build up? And then what excited you about that job? So it's really more of a walkthrough with them, that as we build the resume, in an hour or 2 hours, is
yeah.
having that same approach methodology, but just accelerated. And so you want to be able to get the resume out in the market, floating around in, 3 to 4 days, right? Because you need that lead time. So yeah, it's still the same approach that I use, but again, accelerated. And afterwards, when they do get a job, if they want to think more about now what I call career development, which is different than career coaching, then we sit down and we elaborate a little bit more on some of these concepts of skills, passion, and impact.
That's great. So in terms of those three things, and how do they tie back? We looking again at the skills, the passion, and the impact. How do they tie back to the work that you do around resumes, the LinkedIn strategy, the interview preparation that you do with the clients? How does that story get told?
Yeah, so when all is said and done, a resume has to have what I call internal consistency. So when I'm reading your story, I need to have a common narrative about Melanie, for example, what you've done in the past, and you're telling me now, presenting me what you've done, but you're only listing the things that you're proud of. They have to be things that you're absolutely proud of, that back and forward, like the back of your hand. You could describe, you could talk about the outcomes, you get really excited by that. And that has to match your current role as well, sort of in a sense that it may not be the same kind of degree of the skills that you've learned, but when you roll everything together, there's a thread that says, for example, I've done a lot of work in accounting, finance, change management throughout my life, but actually the common theme is that I love building teams. So what that means is that when you think about skills, impact, and passion, is that I actually love building teams, and I've been really good at it, and there's an impact there. So translate it to a resume. It's really around, tell me your story now, once you've thought all said and done, and use the resume to, if you think about sort of your story as a vertical pole, everything around your resume has to revolve around that. So it doesn't mean that every single project has to mention building teams, but it simply has to start developing around, like, language around capability with an organization, or, understanding what is in the market as far as skill sets. Like, it has to kind of speak to that language where, if I'm the recruiter, I know exactly where, Melanie should be placed in my organization, because I can tell that story. I know what makes her tick. And then the impact piece of it is, as I'm reading your resume, recruiters are always thinking about not just this role, they're thinking about where you're going to move next in their company, right? And especially if they're internal recruiters, they're not being paid by compensation or by commission, right? They're thinking long-term. So you want to be able to help them to understand that single storyline. So what this questioning approach does is help you have confidence in that story. And that resume is going to resonate with that. So, when you see some of the before and after videos that I put up, which kind of show when the resume comes into my process and then what I work through, you'll see that coming out of it is a much clearer story, as opposed to kind of all these random bullet points that talk about successes and all that stuff.
Yeah. I know that in certain countries, it's known to put your resume as a bullet point. So as you said, you've taken that out, you've told that story. Because in Canada, it's really critical to tell that story, because that will highlight you. And you're also talking about the experiences of, what you've done with certain clients before. Can you give us an example or two of how this was implemented and the outcome of that?
Yeah, well, let me clarify that bullet points are still the way to tell a story. And so I'm a firm believer in there are narrative kind of CVs, but they're very difficult to read. And when you put it through the applicant tracking system, that software, they don't pick up the keywords as easily. So bullet points are still very important. And I do use bullet points to tell that story. But a good example is I had a client who was a frontline worker. They were an ambulance person. They were paramedic. And all their lives, for about 9 years, they had been doing like critical frontline work, right? Go to the assessment scene of an accident and figure out how things should look like, and how to fix things and everything. But then they wanted to switch over into an administrative role, and they wanted to work for the government specifically. And they were saying, how do I convert what I've done for 9 years, which is in the field? I know a lot about medical terminology, but I want to put it into terminology that an office manager might understand, right? So then I began to ask the questions about what skill do you bring in? Well, I can assess a situation. I'm a pretty good leader. And then I asked them, well, why do people follow you? It's like, well, I'm able to kind of relate to the strategy, but also to the individuals there. Okay, that's great. So you start building that. Okay, here's a skill. So what were you passionate about as a paramedic? Well, it was actually working with the families. He said, oh, yeah, I really worked with the families to kind of help them understand the situation. And, I was good at working with the accident scene and helping people medically, but really it was something else, right, that I loved to do. So passion was there. And the impact was obviously, well, what impact did you feel the most? Well, I was able to alleviate a situation, and among a lot of confusion and ambiguity, I could solve a problem. Okay, so that's great. So then I took that and I said, well, let's convert that into business language now. Okay, so if you say your skill set coming in is to be able to assess a scene, well, in business, I said, assessing a scene really means walking into a situation where an operation or manufacturing plant might be in big disarray, right? Spending a lot of money trying to produce something that's not of value, and your return on investment is not large. So you're going to come in there, you're going to try to solve that problem. You're going to assess the scene. So let's start writing things down about projects you've done before as a paramedic that kind of begin to bring that out into business language. So there's a few projects that he had worked on that was more administrative while he was a paramedic. He kind of started talking about that. And so we started assessment, facilitation, kind of, market understanding, things like that, that really kind of spoke to the strategy element of things. And then next was passion, right? So if you love dealing with people, then it was around, well, let's talk about team building and making sure that you have the right people around the room. So when you work together on a business problem, you've got people that are there in context, knowing how to put the input in place, and you know how to relate to them, because it's not just about the problem, but it's dealing with the people who are in that situation, right? So it was kind of like working with families. So we took these things and translated them basically from his language into a business language. And when you have that underlying passion, impact, and skill set there, it's not that difficult now. The way I add value to my clients is that I'm able to translate that over into the speak of the corporate world, or whatever it is that they're trying to do. So that's an example. That's probably the starkest example of taking something that was from this world and moving it to this world in a completely different sense, but bridged together by those three questions.
I think that's a great example, because it takes something that is really out of the administrative kind of environment and putting that into that in a relatable and understandable way, which is what really makes you good at what you do. So it even makes me excited to get my resume rewritten and find out what my skills, if someone can sit down and understand, help you to understand what your skills and your passion would be. That's fantastic stuff. It's great work. And how do people get hold of you? I know that you've got your website. You are on the Howzit website as well. They can get information on there. What type of services, just take us quickly, what type of services would you offer around this?
Yeah, sure. And I'm a proud partner for Howzit. I do have my own business, elevate.strategy.com. So it's elevate as in the word, and then dot is DOT. Strategy is that word as well, and .com. But the services I offer are kind of three main things. So there's three core things. Number one is career coaching. And what that means are sessions where I walk the client through to the end point, which is what their value proposition is. That's a really big word, but actually what that really means is, if I were to approach you, Mel, and you had a business, which you do, and I would just say, hire me, you'd say, why? And I would say, well, here's the value that I add to you, right? I am good at these things, and I want to do these things, and I believe your business needs solving in this. It's actually getting them to that point. So career coaching is sessions where we sit down and talk about, the three questions, and then sort of what is your value proposition going to be coming up. And the second element of things, which is by far the most common way that clients come in first, is the resume and LinkedIn kind of coaching, right? So specifically on resumes and cover letter, it's how do I tell that story in my resume such that it is more appealing and attractive and consistent to a recruiter. And then it'll get in front of the right people, and therefore they'll ask the right questions, and I'll be a better fit for them because I've told a better story about myself. So coming out of coaching is then putting it on paper, which is the resume. And the third piece is really the LinkedIn and social media. So I know you're in social media as a designer yourself, Mel, but for us in a persona and personal branding, LinkedIn is a very, very critical tool. And I know folks from other countries may not use it as much, but in North America, especially in Canada, LinkedIn is such a critical networking tool. It's a really big.
If it's not one of the most important ones, right? It's
it is, and
enormous.
That's right. And the way that we use it is oftentimes we only use about 25-30% of the capacity of what's intended for. LinkedIn as a tool is really more intended for generating your thought leadership and letting people know what you're about, right? Not so much just having like a phone book directory of who you know, and that's what we use it for typically, is to kind of find out, who this person is and what their background is, so we're prepared to talk to them. But when you start developing your persona on LinkedIn, where you start writing thought leadership material and having a point of view, etc., it starts generating a buzz around your profile, and that attracts two types of people. Number one, they attract like-minded people, right? So they help you network that way. But more importantly, they attract recruiters and they attract headhunters, because they're going to be looking for keywords and things that are points of view that you have. And so you're going to have a lot more relevance when you have people coming to you with job opportunities, right? You're not going to have to kind of sift through all the noise. And that's what happens when you use LinkedIn in a proper way. So I spend a lot of time in those kind of three areas. And there's also other things like salary negotiation for more senior people and other things as well. But those are kind of primarily the services that I offer.
That sounds great. I know that we're going to have another session around how, and I think this one would fit in greatly within the skills, and people don't think that, but within the skills and the passion of impact, there's always failure. And how do you kind of take that failure and you let it guide your resume? That's going to be the next one, which is coming up shortly after this video. And so I think, please, guys, stay tuned for the ones that's interested in about that. I know that we'll also be chatting about some LinkedIn tips and tricks which you can share with people immigrating or people working on their resume, and how to use LinkedIn successfully. So I'm looking forward to the next chats that we'll be having. Yeah, great chatting to you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Simeon.
Take care. Until next time.
Thank you.